Hi everyone, this video is about the AP Psychology AAQ. In this video, I'll go through each part of the article analysis question step by step. I'll walk you through what you can expect and how you should approach this type of question. So what is an AAQ? An AAQ is an article analysis question. It consists of one peer-reviewed research study that has been shortened and summarized. It will start with an introduction. It will share a little bit about the participants in the study, the procedures that were used. It will include some data that was collected, and then it will share the findings of that particular study. You will be asked to complete 6 tasks related to that study. And the College Board will allot students a total of 25 minutes to complete this. Now, 25 minutes is a recommendation. You will actually get a total of 70 minutes to complete 2 free responses, and they recommend about 25 minutes for this particular AAQ. They say students should spend about 10 minutes reading the research study, followed by about 15 minutes to respond to the 6 tasks. So now let me go over the tasks that you can expect to do with each research study. I think it's always really helpful to first go through the things that you will be asked to do before you read the study itself. So let's break down each of the tasks. First, you will be asked to identify the research method that's used in the study. So as you're reading, you should be looking for the characteristics that help you identify what type of research method this is. It could be an experiment. It could be a correlational research study, it could be a case study, it could be a naturalistic observation, or even a meta-analysis. And you should be looking for clues as you read to help you understand and identify what type of research method this particular study is using. Notice how the task verb at the beginning of this statement says identify. This means that all you need to do is state the method in the study. So enough would be just saying the research method used in this study is blank. And that would be enough to score the point for this particular task. Your second task in the AAQ is to state the operational definition of an identified variable. And they will tell you which variable they would like for you to operationally define. But in general, you can expect to see this as your second task. Now, remember, an operational definition is a precise explanation of a variable. It's usually a quantifiable explanation, something that future researchers could look at and would understand what your variables were. And if they wanted to reproduce this study, they knew exactly how to use the same variables that you have used. So an operational definition is a precise explanation of how you could measure that particular variable. And notice how the first word says state. This task verb means that the College Board wants you to simply present your answer without needing an explanation. This means that you could use a single sentence, such as, the operational definition of blank is blank. And this would be enough to score for the second task on the AAQ. The third task in the AAQ will be to describe the meaning of an identified statistic. And in the research study that you read, you will be presented with data that they have collected. And it could be in the form of mean, median, mode, range, standard deviation, percentile rank, skewness, correlation coefficients, statistical significance, or even effect size. And you'll need to share what that statistic means in relation to the study. Now, notice how it says describe. This task verb means that the College Board wants you to do more than just present the answer, but also share what it means. So for example, if the task is asking you about the mean, you would need to do more than just state the mean. For example, your response might be something like this. The mean score in the study was a score of 50 points. And this shows us that this description would then help you understand that you are able to connect that statistic with the research findings and what that statistic really means. The fourth task in the AAQ is to identify at least one ethical guideline applied by the researchers. This means that as you're reading, you need to be listening for ethical guidelines clearly described within the prompt of the study. It could be something like the researchers got approval by the Institutional Review Board, or they obtained informed consent from adult participants, or they obtained informed assent from participants under the age of 18. Or maybe they showed protection from harm. Or possibly they might mention how they took an effort to keep information confidential. Or they might mention how they debriefed the participants in the study at the conclusion. Now, notice in this statement, it says to identify. And this task verb means that the College Board wants you to simply state one of the ethical guidelines that was followed. So it could be done in a simple sentence like this: one of the ethical guidelines followed by this study was. Now, the fifth task in the AAQ is to explain the extent to which the research findings may or may not be generalizable. Now, generalizability refers to the extent to which a study can be generalized or applied broadly to the larger population. So, your task will be to evaluate the participants in this study. You'll be looking at the sample, and you'll want to notice the demographics of the sample and see if they represent the population that's being studied, or if they don't accurately represent the population being studied. Now, notice how it says explain. This task verb means that the College Board wants you to do more than just say, yes, the results of this study are generalizable to the broader population, or no, this is not generalizable. They want you to explain why. So after you say yes or you say no, you will need to explain your reasoning. Like, the study is not generalizable to the larger population because over 93% of the participants in the sample were female, and the population includes both male and female. Or the study is generalizable to both men and women because the sample included a balance of both men and women. And this would not only state whether or not it is generalizable, but it would show how and explain how this study is generalizable to the broader population. The last task you'll be asked to do in the AAQ is to explain one of the findings and how it either supports or refutes the hypothesis. Or instead of hypothesis, they could ask you to see how the findings support or refute or relate to the focus of the study. They could put a concept in there and ask you to take some of the findings and then relate it to a psychological concept. So this is going to require you to pull out specific results from the study and then determine if it aligns with the prediction or the hypothesis, or how it aligns with a particular concept they might bring up. Now, this part of the AAQ is worth 2 points. And notice that the task verb is to explain. So not only will you need to state the results and share what the results mean, but whether or not it supports or refutes the prediction or the hypothesis, or how it relates to a particular psychology concept. Now, these are the 6 tasks you'll be asked to respond to in an article analysis question. Now let's work through the sample AAQ that's presented in the CED for students and teachers to prepare with. So this particular AAQ gives these 6 tasks, and I'll read them to you. It says, using the source provided, respond to all the parts of the question. Part A says, identify the research method used in the study. Part B says, state the operational definition of, and here is the variable we should be looking for, executive functioning. Part C says, describe the meaning of the differences in the means. So our statistic we're going to be looking for are the means between the immediate recall task in the multivitamin group and the placebo group. So we need to be listening for the means for these 2 different groups, because we're going to have to describe the differences between the means in those 2 groups. Part B says, identify at least one ethical guideline applied by the researchers. Part E says explain the extent to which the research findings may or may not be generalizable using specific and relevant evidence from the study. And Part F says explain how at least one of the research findings supports or refutes the researcher's hypothesis. And they're actually telling us the hypothesis here, which is taking a multivitamin slows cognitive decline later in life. Okay, so let's keep all of those tasks in mind as we read through this research study. I'll read it aloud to you, and you should be listening for some of those key tasks and key terms that we should be picking up on as we go. I would suggest if you have a copy of this to underline or circle things that stand out to you that fit with some of those tasks that we are being asked to do. So let me read this to you. It says, few large scale, long term studies have been conducted to test whether taking multivitamins makes a difference in improving memory as one ages. In this study, researchers examined whether taking a multivitamin slows cognitive decline later in life. So, first, I noticed a few things, and I'll talk you through my thought processes as I was reading that. So, I noticed that the introduction already shared the variables that this study is looking at, and I will underline them here. One of the variables is multivitamins, and the other variable is cognitive decline. And researchers are examining whether multivitamins are slowing cognitive decline later in life. And I know that experiments can show me if one variable directly causes the other. And I think that's what they're implying here by examining whether multivitamins can slow cognitive decline. So I'm pretty sure that they are implying cause and effect, but I'll just hold that in my mind as I read. I want to look for some other clues that might reveal whether or not this is an experiment. I want to be looking for, do they use an experimental group that gets the independent variable? Will they have a control group that's the baseline that doesn't get the independent variable? And are they going to randomly assign participants into those two groups? Are they going to try to control all other variables to make sure only the independent variable is causing the results? Those are things that I would be able to pick up on and know this is an experiment. Now, before moving on, I'll tell you a few other things that just popped in my mind. I noticed when I was reading at the very start, it said few large scale long term studies had been conducted. And so this makes me think that it's saying that there were some previous studies done on related topics. And so these researchers wanted to study it a little bit further. Maybe they wanted to replicate, they wanted to understand this a little bit further. You might have heard that and thought, oh, is this a meta analysis? They're taking a lot of studies. And it doesn't sound like a meta analysis. A meta analysis is where researchers, they themselves aren't necessarily conducting the study, but they're taking many studies on a similar variable, and they're putting them together, and they are looking at the data together from many studies to try to draw conclusions. But I think from this introduction, what this is telling us is that some researchers wanted to replicate a study. And so this seems to be about one particular study. So now let's look at the participants section. Remember, this section will really help us understand if our findings are generalizable. If the participants' demographics reflect the population that we're studying, then we can say they're generalizable. So let's go ahead and read through this. It says an earlier study, which was conducted in 2017 and included 21,000 people, examined the effects of taking a multivitamin on health outcomes. So then it goes on to state from that study's sample, over 7,000 people received a mailed invitation to participate in this study. Okay, so it sounds like this is how they're drawing their participants. It sounds like they've sent out a mailed invitation, and I'm hoping they're using some random sampling of how they, decided who to send out this invitation to. It's not entirely clear though, but it says of those who received the invitation, almost 4,000 participants agreed to participate and were accepted. So this study included almost 4,000 people. And these people were, this will be our sample that we're going to be looking at. To be accepted, participants had to be over 65 years of age if they were women and over 60 years of age if they were men. And so I noticed in the beginning it said we're looking at cognitive decline later in life. So they're drawing their sample of people who are in this particular age group later in their life. So let's keep going. In addition, they could not participate if they ever had a stroke, if they had received a cancer diagnosis in the 2 years before the study, or if they had a history of any other serious illnesses. So that's important because it sounds like they're trying to control any other confounding variables because they don't want to include anyone who had specific health conditions or possibly people who had taken medications that could end up affecting the study. Since they're wanting to know if the multivitamins are slowing cognitive decline, they don't want to include anyone that could have these other circumstances that could impact the results. So this is another clue that this could possibly be experimentation, because in an experiment, they're trying to control any other factors other than the independent variable. So let's keep going. It says participants had to be able to communicate in English and have access to an internet connected computer. A computer randomly assigned participants into two groups. Ooh, I like that. Okay. So random assignment, that's an important feature of an experiment because you're wanting to eliminate potential bias between your experimental group and your control group. And so you're randomly assigning who goes into the experimental group and gets the independent variable and who goes into the control group and does not get the independent variable. And so this is a factor of experimentation. All right, so it says participants in group one received a pack of multivitamins. This is our independent variable. Each month by mail to take one pill twice a day. And participants in group two received a pack of placebo pills in the same type of packaging as group one and with the same instructions. All right, so placebos are given to control groups, and this is to help prevent the possibility of the placebo effect, where if you believe you're getting the independent variable, it might actually influence your results based on the expectation. So this is important that they're giving one group of placebo in the exact same packaging so that participants aren't aware of whether or not they are getting the placebo or if they're actually getting the multivitamin. I also like how they mentioned they gave the same set of instructions. They're just really trying to control all the conditions so everyone has a similar experience. All right, finally, it says the sample size of group one was 1,758 people, and the sample size of group two was 1,804 people. So it's not exact, but it's pretty similar. The demographics of each group are listed in the table. So let's go ahead and look at that table. Okay, so this is the table that's presented in the prompt. It shows the demographics of group one who received the multivitamin and group two who received the placebo. And at this point, I'm pretty confident we're dealing with an experiment. Group one appears to be our experimental group getting the independent variable, and group two appears to be our control group getting the placebo. And if you take your eyes and just scan down both columns, you might notice that group one is fairly similar to group two in its overall makeup. So the way that they used random assignment, they took their sample and then they randomly assigned people into the group one and group two appears to have been really useful because it doesn't seem that there are many glaring differences between the two. Now, let's think about our population. So they're looking at adults later in life, and they're trying to see if this particular sample can help them understand if vitamins, multivitamins, can slow cognitive decline later in life for lots of adults. And so we need to look at this sample and we need to see if this sample is a good reflection of the broader population. And first, I see that this sample is made up mostly of women. And so I think that could be a slight issue in that it's not super balanced between men and women. The sample has fewer men. Next, I'm also noticing that the sample has very few non-white participants. So the majority of the data is around like 93 to 94% white participants. So these are all some really important considerations when we're talking about if the results from this sample can be generalized to the broader population. So now let's work through the methods section. This will be where they explain how the study was conducted. This will outline the procedures and it's going to give us some clues about ethical guidelines. It's probably going to continue to affirm to us what type of study this was. It'll present more about our variables and it's going to reveal some more information that we need to answer those tasks. So let me read this to you. Once a year for 3 years, participants were asked to complete an online test to evaluate episodic memory and executive functioning. Okay, so did you hear that? They're evaluating cognitive decline based on two different factors. One is episodic memory, and the other is that variable we're supposed to operationally define, executive functioning. So this is something that we're going to need to listen for. We're going to need to be able to precisely explain how they're measuring executive functioning. All right, so instructions on how to access the test materials were emailed to participants, and participants who responded to the email indicated their consent. Did you catch that was an ethical guideline? They were emailed instructions and were asked to give their consent. The participants received a $15 gift card for each annual assessment, regardless of their completion. That's another important aspect. So it implies that the participants were allowed to withdraw at any time. The multivitamin used is widely available in the United States. All right, so this gives us a clue about our broader population, which is likely going to be Americans. So our sample of Americans should reflect the demographics of Americans. Okay, so side effects of taking the multivitamin include low rates of stomach pain, diarrhea, skin rash, bruising, and an increased rate of gastrointestinal bleeding, which are considered normal side effects for those taking a multivitamin in the general population. So it doesn't say this, but I assume that they're letting us know that these were all disclosed to the participants in the study, all of these possible side effects. Two different tasks were used to measure episodic memory and executive functioning. Oh, hear that word, executive functioning? Remember, we're supposed to operationally define it. So we're going to have to quantify. How do we measure executive functioning? So first, it says to measure episodic memory, participants completed a recall task in which they were first shown a set of words, presented one at a time for 3 seconds each. They were then asked to recall the set of words once, immediately after the word list was presented, and again after 15 minutes had passed. Participants who recalled more words correctly earned higher scores on this test. Then it says, to measure executive functioning. Participants were first shown one set of items and were then shown a second set of items. They were asked to identify whether items in the second set of items were the same or different from the first set of items they were shown. Participants earned higher scores the more quickly they correctly identified whether the items from the second set of items were the same as or different from those in the original set. All right, so this was our method section. Okay, so let's finish this research study. We have the results and discussion section left, and we're still looking for a few specific things. We have not yet heard anything about Part C or Part F. So Part C asked us to describe the meaning of the differences in the means for the immediate recall task between the multivitamin group and then the placebo group. And then we haven't quite heard anything about Part F, which is asking us to explain at least one of the research findings and whether it supports or refutes the researcher's hypothesis that taking the multivitamin slows cognitive decline later in life. So let's keep those things in mind while we're working through this. It says, compared with the participants taking the placebo, participants receiving the multivitamin had significantly greater improvement in the recall task at the end of the first year. All right, so that sounds good. Cognitive decline is when your memory and your mental abilities are starting to reduce over time. And from that statement, it looks like the people who took the multivitamin had better memory at the end of the first year. Now, remember, when we are explaining whether the hypothesis is supported or refuted, we need to provide specific findings. So let's listen for some specific evidence here. So it says performance on the immediate recall memory task in group 1 improved from a mean of 7.1 words at the baseline to 7.81 words after 1 year of taking the multivitamin, which was an improvement mean of 0.71. Okay, remember, we're comparing the means, the improvement means. So that'll be something important to keep in mind. In group 2, which received the placebo pills, performance on the immediate recall memory task improved from a mean of 7.21 words at baseline to 7.65 words after 1 year, and improvement mean of 0.44. When comparing the multivitamin group with the placebo group averaged across all 3 years of intervention, findings suggest that the memory improvement is sustained over time, as shown in the graph. Researchers estimate that the effect of the multivitamin intervention improved memory performance in participants in the multivitamin group by the equivalent of 3.1 years of age-related memory change as compared to the participants in the placebo group. Researchers also found that executive functioning was not significantly impacted by taking the multivitamin. So it seems like the multivitamin did affect one of the variables of cognitive decline, or one of the factors we were looking at. It did seem to have an improvement on episodic memory, but not so much on executive functioning. All right, so the last sentence is usually important for just understanding an overall conclusion, and it says, the findings suggest that the greatest benefit to taking a multivitamin is found in immediate memory recall, something especially vulnerable in aging adults. All right, that's it. We read the whole research study. Now, here are the 6 parts of the question that you'll have to respond to. I think that if you start with these particular tasks and you have them in mind as you're reading, that will really help you when you get to this part and you need to respond. Now, I would go through them and see if I could answer them. I think if you're able to, you are on the right track and you have mastered your first AAQ. So this is how I would work through an AP Psychology AAQ. I hope it was helpful for you. Thanks for watching.